All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Biopharmaceutical Industry Career Fair brought to you by the National Institute of Statistical Sciences. Now, this virtual career fair really focuses on opportunities for biostatisticians, statisticians, and data scientists from 3 companies in the biostatistics and pharmaceutical industry. Now, as attendees, you will be provided with an inside look at the research that these statisticians and these companies get involved in career opportunities for you to consider. And we are so thrilled to welcome our speakers to the career fair. These speakers are well distinguished and have between them decades of experiences in their respective roles. We want to welcome José Pinheiro, a senior director at Johnson & Johnson, Yenny Webb Vargas, a principal statistical scientist at Genentech. We have Yudu, director in statistics at Eli Lilly and Company. And last but not least, Rebbecca Wilson, principal statistician in immunology, the Janssen pharmaceutical companies of Johnson & Johnson. And as a key for our Q&A session, it'll occur following the presentations of all speakers. And there we ask that our attendees fill the Q&A on the Zoom, and the panelists will answer as a group or individually. Okay. So for our first speaker, we have José Pinheiro. José is the senior director of Johnson & Johnson. He has a PhD in statistics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, having worked at Bell Labs and Novartis Pharmaceuticals prior to his current position as Vice President and Global Head of Statistical Modeling and Methodology in the Statistics and Decision Sciences Department at Janssen Research and Development. Ooh, that was a mouthful. He has been involved in methodological development in various areas of statistics and drug development, including dose finding, adaptive designs, and mixed effects methods. He is currently the president of the International Biometric Society. He is a fellow of the American Statistical Association, past editor of Statistics and Biopharmaceutical Research, and past president of the East North American region, ENAR, of the IBS. We want to welcome José.
Thank you very much, Christopher. I know I should have cut on my my own bios there. There's too much information, but thank you very much. Thank you also, Jim and Megan, for the invitation to be here today. It's a thrill for me to be able to talk to you about career opportunities and career paths, I guess, in the biopharmaceutical industry. So let me bring up my slides. Just 1 second, please bear with me. Well, let me first share my screen. Right? So, okay. I hope you can all see it. And let me put that into slide. All right. So as Kristen said at the beginning, I work at Johnson & Johnson, and more specifically, the pharmaceutical sector of the company, which is known as Janssen Research and Development. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the group that I work in, mostly because it's somewhat different, I believe, than the other presentations that the other panelists will be giving, which is perhaps even more useful to you, the others, and not mine, because it's the more traditional work in the pharmaceutical industry. So for folks that are starting, considering a career in the biopharma industry, I think it's important to know what is the day-to-day activities, what are the typical work of a clinical biostatistician. So I work in a group that similar groups exist in other companies as well, but not all of them. So mostly big pharma can afford, let's say, to have groups that are dedicated to methodological advancements and to support to other statisticians. But without further ado, let me go straight into it. So I have been at Johnson & Johnson for 14 years. Before that, I was at Novartis for 8 years. So I guess I probably contribute maybe with half of the decades of experience that Christian was alluding to, a reflection of my age, of course. But I've been around for a while, and I've always been involved in groups like the one that I'm currently working on, right? And mostly I wanted to talk to you about it because I want people also to be aware that there are opportunities for research, methodological development, and activities that, in some sense, at times at least, resemble aspects of academia without ever being as fully dedicated to research as a job in academia would be, but maybe kind of a compromise so that people can work in some method development, even software development for that matter, but always focus on projects and applications. And you also get an opportunity to work with other biostatisticians in the pharma industry. So a group like the one that I work has a greater focus on methodological specialization. So we have a number of experts in different, and I have a next slide will be about that, in topics that are of relevance for drug development that people use most of the time in areas that we want to get into. So the more traditional work of a clinical biostatistician, people often have to focus on disease expertise. So they focus on oncology, they focus on immunology and so forth. For us, we can take a sit back and work more on the methodological, leveraging the knowledge that the other statisticians have and working in close collaboration with them. It's really teamwork that we have to do, and we only exist in the company as long as we can justify our existence through the support that we provide to the bulk of the department, which are clinical biostatisticians. So we focus a lot on design of clinical studies and methods for analyzing the data, how to make go, no-go decisions, which are critical in drug development. Should I go to the next phase? Should I give up on this drug? And we do a lot of this through simulations. So a lot of the group is really heavily focused on what we call scenario planning, which is understanding potential assumptions about what may happen in a trial and running the trial in the computer before it actually happens, so that we can say, if we go this way, this is how the decision may reflect in the overall program. And it's like simulating a plan before you put it in the air, right? So we don't want to be trial and error. Oh, let's see if the plane is going to fly. So we do that, a lot of that beforehand. And in the process, we help the decision makers when the actual decision-making time comes to be. As I mentioned, we do a lot of work in teams. It's critical for us to have the knowledge sharing aspect of it. And so it's very enjoyable work. If you like to work with teams, with other people, and feeling that you are part of a bigger group than just by yourself. So I mentioned before that we have a specialization in some methodological areas. And just to give you a flavor of what areas that people work in pharmaceutical, in biopharma, and that people in group like the one that I am tend to work on. So there's a lot of discussions on adaptive designs. Bayesian methods are becoming more and more utilized, even though we work in a regulated environment within the pharma industry. So we cannot just use whatever we want when it comes time to try to get approval for a drug. So we have to get approval from acceptance from regulatory agencies such as FDA, EMA in Europe, and other agencies around the world. So in many ways, we also have to collaborate with people who are in the government, in the regulatory side, to ensure that the application of methods is acceptable, is to the standard that they would validate that after we bring them up for results. But a lot of emphasis in trying to understand biomarkers for early decision-making, methods on causal inference, trial simulations. I don't want to go through all of them, but these are all areas that have a direct application in drug development at various stages, from very early on, when you are even looking at discovery of new potential compounds, as you move to animal studies, and as you move to clinical trials, which are experiments in humans, right? And all of these are methods that are heavily used. To the latest, like machine learning methods, like data science methods, we also try to use that a lot in our days to keep up with the the science and the advances that are there. So anyway, Megan and Randy asked me to put like a reference on how to apply for jobs at J&J. So you will be getting copies of those slides, but that's basically the web address that you can go to and find about open opportunities, career paths, and whatever is available in a company like J&J. Without further ado, let me let some time for the other speakers to also talk, and I'm sure that we'll be having questions, and I'll be happy to address them afterwards. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jose, for this great overview. And it was really important to highlight the areas of methodological expertise that are needed as statisticians and biostatisticians and data scientists. So thank you so much for this presentation. Up next, I would like to introduce Dr. Rebbecca Wilson. She is a principal statistician in immunology, currently working on late phase IBD clinical trials. She joined Janssen in February 2020. She previously worked at Fifth Third Bank as the lead data scientist. And Rebbecca obtained her doctorate in public health and biostatistics from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 2018, and her AB in pre-medical studies and Spanish from Bowdoin College in 2007. And prior to beginning her graduate studies, she completed a post-bac program in mathematics and statistics at Smith College. She also worked in biostatistics at Massachusetts General Hospital and taught English as a secondary school in Toledo, Spain. Rebbecca's research interests include longitudinal, categorical, and missing data analysis. Her dissertation research focused on imputation and repeated measures analyses for accelerometer data. And she enjoys staying active, reading, and fishing in her free time. Welcome, Rebbecca.
Hi, Christian. It's good to see you. It's good to see some familiar faces here in the group. Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me on this panel. It's a pleasure to be here. As Christian mentioned, my name is Rebbecca Wilson, and I've been at Janssen for roughly 3 years now. I work in immunology, and I work in immunology. So José is in another group within SDS. So we are a broader group with a number of other groups. And the best way I can describe them is like, we have sort of a group of like therapeutic areas or indications. And then we also have a group for sort of like expertise and areas of responsibility, which is where José's group falls. So just to kind of give you an understanding, José and I are both in the same company. But yeah, it's my pleasure to be here to discuss, the drug development process and the SDS scope of responsibilities in the drug development process. I'll also talk about the SDS mission and how we achieve it. And I will also discuss sort of the career trajectory for someone within SDS and what success looks like. So first I'll talk about the drug development lifecycle and the SDS scope of responsibilities. And so like I mentioned, we're kind of a big group. But as you can see here on the slide, essentially, individuals within SDS are involved all throughout the drug development process. So from when we're looking at thousands and thousands of molecules all the way through getting the drug approved. So on the screen here at the bottom, the green boxes show the different phases of the drug development process. And then in the blue box, the lighter blue box shows the duration of each of those different phases. And I think sort of the key takeaway here, one of the key takeaways is that a company typically has 20 years of exclusivity for a drug. And then, so exclusivity, so the patent life for that drug typically lasts 20 years, but 12 to 14 of those years are spent getting the drug approved. So if you do the math, that leaves roughly 6 years of exclusivity. As I mentioned, within SDS, we're a highly quantitative group. And so we are involved sort of all throughout this process, applying rigorous statistical methods to ensure, product quality, efficacy, and safety. As I mentioned, again, SDS is a very quantitative group. And so, in terms of our mission, we strive to drive robust and scientifically informed decision-making. And that can be sort of demonstrated by this sort of cyclical figure in the middle with data, knowledge, and strategy, where, we have, lots of different data from lots of different sources. So primarily we might get data from our patients in clinical trials. We might have sort of survey data, maybe from some of the consumers. And we could also use data from like some external repository. But our goal with that data is to extract some information or insights, to gain knowledge so that we can help drive strategy. And, we do this in a handful of ways. I'll just highlight 3 here. The first being, we drive, this informed decision-making through collaborative leadership. And what that essentially means is within SDS, the statisticians here, we are considered as equal collaborators. So we have sort of this equal seat at the table with our cross-functional partners. So in addition to providing, sample size calculations, writing SAPs and performing, providing outputs, we also are, have a seat at the table when it comes to making strategic decisions within the company. And I think that's a good thing in terms of learning and just getting better at our craft as statisticians. Sometimes it's easy for us to become siloed. But if you really take the time and sit and get to know your, the clinicians or data managers or your regulatory partners, it can really help to refine some of the work that you do. Another way we drive sort of scientifically informed decision-making is through modeling and simulation. And, the concept here is similar to maybe like a flight simulator, where you might have, different flight paths, weather, the type of plane, and you might consider other factors in order to find the optimal sort of flight path. And, you have some measure of success, right, to judge, how optimal a path might be. So similarly, in clinical trials, we can perform simulations to essentially identify the optimal patient population, the correct dose, as well as the study duration. And then lastly, on the right-hand side, design of experiments is a critical job performed by statisticians. This is something that we do. And in the broadest sense, it allows us to consider multiple input factors and variations in those input factors and their effect on some outcome of interest. So understanding a number of different trial designs and execution scenarios can help us avoid analytical problems down the line. We ultimately want to ensure that the data we obtain can be analyzed to yield valid and objective conclusions. So here I'll talk a little bit about what the career trajectory for someone might look like within SDS. And on, the blue boxes on the left-hand side, kind of starting at the bottom, you'll find your more entry-level roles. And then towards the top, you'll have the more senior leadership roles. And I think one thing to highlight here is essentially, the expectations regarding, education, experience, and competencies are well-defined for each of these roles. So not only will you have, or should you have some understanding of what your responsibilities are in your current role, you can also view the other job descriptions to kind of understand what it takes to get to that next level. So then in addition to our sort of career trajectory and ladder, to complement that, our leadership team has implemented this sort of developmental pathways framework, where I think, the purpose was to kind of identify within individuals, how do they best work? How do they want to work? Where do they thrive in terms of the ways that they work and what they want to do? And so there's sort of 3 pathways here to consider. So we have the expert level or pathway, and essentially this can be thought of as like an independent contributor role where the individual, possesses some deep expertise in an area of discipline. And they're also considered a thought leader. The next pathway we have is functional, where an individual will remain in a single functional area, but they'll have exposure to different roles. within that functional area, and gaining a variety of skills along the way. And then the third pathway is the sort of end-to-end pathway, where the individual is seen as sort of this cross-functional team leadership, and there's value chain optimization. So the individual is getting exposure to different roles across different functions. And so one thing to note as well in terms of career progression, you don't have to be a people leader to progress, and you also don't have to stay in stats. So there's a lot of flexibility depending on what you want to do. Okay, so now that we know kind of what the trajectory looks like, how do we get there is one question I think it's important to think about. And so what success looks like in SDS is there's, a number of examples here on the slide. And in the interest of time, I'll just focus on a few. I always like to stress communication skills just because, we are highly technically trained individuals in terms of, we understand amazing and very complex methodology. We work with very complex analytical tools, but it's important to be able to sort of curate and, think about the story you're telling with that information, in particular, how you're conveying ideas to your audience, right? For the most part, you're not just working within stats, right? You're working with people, for the most part, who don't have the strong analytical background that we have. So it's important to convey those complex ideas in a way where the audience can digest it, understand it. And if they need to action, if the leadership team needs to take some insights from some of the work that you're doing, they need to action it. That's also something you want to think about in terms of communicating and how you're telling your story. I think the other thing I'll talk about is just being a critical partner. As I mentioned, at Janssen, we're equal collaborators. And so, people do come to us and, we go to other people as well, but people really look to us for, advice and just information and trying to understand things that might affect our studies. So an example of this was, for my study that I work on, it was already kind of organized and in place right before the sort of Russia-Ukraine crisis. And so one of the things we've had to do, in the middle of the study was adapt our sort of missing data rules, right? Like our estimand approach to take into account the missing data that might come about due to the crisis in Russia and Ukraine. So again, being able to answer questions interactively as well, when you're in these cross-functional team meetings is also an important part of being a critical partner. And again, just thinking about helping people, right? So it's one thing to help someone, but do they feel like you helped them? I think that's also an important thing to consider. So, getting that sort of feedback from them, checking in with them. So the last thing I'll talk about is just the leadership traits. All of these are important, but for leadership traits, again, as I mentioned, because we are equal collaborators, we are expected to sort of step up and, have that intellectual curiosity, be innovative, be creative. Think about the big picture, think about problem solving. And problem solving doesn't just mean, we have this analytical, like, how do we analyze this data? Sometimes it could be operational. Sometimes it could be, how do we work more efficiently as a team? That could be an example of problem solving, that you might have to deal with. So, yeah, I think, these are all good examples. Hopefully you can screenshot this, whether you're looking to join a place like Janssen or anywhere else. I think these are all traits that are good to think about on your journey. So yeah, thank you for your time.
Rebbecca, thank you so much for your presentation, especially noting the importance of collaboration between statisticians, clinicians, and any regulatory personnel within the pharmaceutical field. I think we can never overlook the importance of communication, especially when you have collaboration with not your non-technical audience. So that communication is especially important. So thank you so much for your presentation.
Thanks.
Now I would like to introduce Yenny Webb Vargas. She is a principal statistical scientist at Genentech. She helps scientists and engineers design experiments, analyze data, and report findings about bioprocess, quantitative assays, medical devices, and bioanalytic methods. She has a PhD in biostatistics from the Johns Hopkins University, a master's in applied statistics from the Tec de Monterrey, and a bachelor in science and chemistry, bacteriology, and parasitology from the Universidad Autónoma de Nuevo León. Thank you so much, Yenny, for being here with us.
Thank you, Christian. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I just wanted to give people an overview of what non-clinical biostatistics is. My role is in non-clinical biostatistics. One of the things that's really key in our group is to have that like spark to the wish and passion to learn the science too. And so as a statistician, you know the methods, you know all of this. And so it may be a little bit of like in the beginning, it's a little bit of a stretch to start learning the science and learning like the language that the scientist and engineer use, learning the basics of what is going on in an assay, in a bioprocess, and all these things. But it's very fun, and as I mentioned, like drug development is very vast. And so you can either specialize in one area, or you can sample a few. I've sampled a few, and at Roche Genentech, there is individual contributor career path that can go into like leadership positions where you're leading projects, you're leading initiatives. You may not have direct reports, but you may be in strategic positions to move around and make an impact. And there's the people leader group, people leader career track, where you do have direct reports and you're in charge, like your task in supporting their career development. And so they're okay. I'm gonna stop right there and see if people have questions.
Thank you so much, Yenny, for your presentation, especially giving the overview on non-clinical development. And I'm at P&G, Procter & Gamble, and I'm the sole PhD statistician and scientist supporting global product safety, safety assessment, and ecotoxicology, and all within the non-clinical setting, especially, testing particular chemicals to ensure safety on different products that we use in fabric and home care, beauty and grooming. So that's really much what the field and the space that I'm in, and it's a non-clinical setting. So I really do appreciate, and I'm sure the attendees as well really appreciate your presentation. So we're gonna leave the questions for after our presenters. And up next, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Yu Du. He is the director in statistics and group leader in diabetes and obesity therapeutic area, providing statistical leadership to chronic weight management, compound development in the late phase at Eli Lilly and Company. He graduated from Johns Hopkins University with a PhD in biostatistics. He has been very passionate about developing new statistical methods for better clinical trial design and data analysis that impact drug development, including the research on prediction modeling, bias adjustments, and covariate adjustments. Without further ado, you take it away.
Thank you, Chris, for the introduction. Can you hear me okay? And see the screen? Great, thank you. Thank you for organizing this and for the opportunity. It's my privilege to come here, share with you a little bit about the company, Eli Lilly, and our company culture and the stat function within the company. And also, I will share with you like my personal career journey so far, and also the opportunity we have here. So let's get started. So I will start from this kind of a career journey path. I have been with company for 5 years, since 2018. Back in 2017, I did an internship at Eli Lilly during my 4th year PhD program. And I received a full-time job offer after the end of internship. And I decided to join the company. And I graduated from Johns Hopkins University in 2018, 1 year later with a PhD in statistics. Actually, Yenny and I graduated from the same university. Glad to see you here. We had some overlap in school. Yeah, and at that time, I joined a statistical group in early phase diabetes, basically covering phase 1, phase 2, if you still remember what Yenny and Rebbecca talked about for the drug development process. I also have a similar slide later. Basically covering a few compounds in the portfolio, providing the clinical stat support, like working on authoring of protocol, statistical analysis plan, study support, study report, etc. And 2 years later, I was promoted to the group leader for this diabetes early phase, covering non-insulin compounds development, mainly for this chronic weight management indication. And then another 2 years, for another two years, last year I was promoted again to the director of statistics, also the group leader, where I lead a larger group for one particular chronic weight management compound development in late phase 3. And earlier this year, I expanded my responsibility to cover all chronic weight management pillar and the compounds development in the late phase. And basically, one interesting fact I want to share is that the Johns Hopkins University and Eli Lilly company, they were founded exactly in the same year, 1876. So I didn't notice this until the very first orientation day. So what a connection there. So I want to give you a little bit about our company. We actually have more than 146, this year 147 years of strong history, founded in 1876 by Colonel Eli Lilly. And since our founding, we have pioneered medical breakthroughs, such as the very first commercially available human insulin, the polio vaccine, and many other breakthrough therapies. Like recently, we have this COVID-19 antibody. And we also set a very high standard for giving back to our community. The 4 priorities kind of proposed by Colonel Eli Lilly, like the quality, people, customer, products, still remain our priorities nowadays, and very aligned with our common purpose now, which is Lilly unites caring with discovery to create medicines that make life better for people around the world. And our values focus on integrity, excellence, and respect for people. We are a global company headquartered in Indianapolis, state of Indiana. We have about 36,000 employees worldwide. R&D alone has 8,000, and the stat function is within this R&D department. And you can see those numbers. We are a global company with footprints around the globe. Basically, this shows our commitment to give back to our community. There's, lots of fun activities, but one thing I want to highlight is this Lilly's Global Day of Service started from 2008. It actually is one of the largest single-day volunteer initiatives of any US company, where at that one single day in September, every employee from Eli Lilly will go out to the community, do the community work, like kind of paving the road and painting the wall, getting rid of the weeds, etc. Very fun activities. That shows our commitment to give back to our communities. And we focus on this. These are the key therapeutic areas we focus on. Main thing is diabetes, and others also important: immunology, oncology, pain, and neurodegeneration. And basically, I just want to use several keywords to highlight what it's like to work at Lilly. So first, discover. Basically, at a pharmaceutical company, our main purpose is to discover medicine. But as the statistician, we may be able to discover a new and better statistical approach to solve the problem we encounter during this drug development process. And of course, you can also discover new friends, discover new things about yourself. And the team, actually, I think teamwork, collaboration is what has been kind of highlighted across everywhere. And Team Lilly is recent kind of a slogan we have. I would say we actually try to cultivate this teamwork culture and inclusion, so everyone can kind of bring themselves, true selves, and ideas to the table in pursuit of our common purpose. And basically, our employees are our biggest strength. So at Lilly, we care about each one of the employees physically, financially, in terms of career planning at the community level and social level, etc. And for benefits, I think, I mean, we do offer very competitive pay, on-site services, very convenient. We have on-site health clinic, gym, fitness center, dental, lots of things. And we have free access to like many gym in the United States. And we have this career planning, we have this comprehensive retirement plan. Maybe I think Lilly is still one of the few companies that still offer pension. And we really want to promote this diversity, equity, and inclusion. You can see how many recognitions we have received on that topic from the past year alone. And at Lilly, we actually highlight many journeys from different kind of group, like the African American journey, women's journey, Asian journey, Latino, Hispanic, LGBTQ journey. Through this journey, we have a very good understanding about our own employees so that we can do a better job at inclusion. And statistics. So at Lilly, we have this function called statistics, data, and analytics. We have this SDNA, which is the short for this full name. And our purpose of this stat function is to make life better across the globe through efficient and innovative statistical support to overall drug development. And here's the list of our ASA fellows. Basically, probably you know some of the names here. What I want to say is that we actually highly value the research piece within the stat. And you can see probably we have the largest number of ASA fellows among the industry, I believe. Yeah, and also myself for the past 3 years, I was also co-leading a group called the Statistical Innovation in Diabetes, where people kind of sit together and discuss the problem, the issues they encounter during their routine support to clinical trial. And we can kind of brainstorm. Some of them may be translated into interesting statistical research problem, medical research that we can kind of work on. And also we can brainstorm anything, or we can improve, not only limited to the stat research or the research piece, but also for the operational piece, whether or not we can come up with a new guideline, new guidance to streamline our current practice or something else. So we focus a lot on this innovation piece. And okay, here it is. I would save time here since it has been kind of walked through by Yenny and Rebbecca. We have similar process here in terms of the drug development. So we start from this drug discovery to preclinical development and clinical product development and commercialization. Basically, I was focused on this phase 1, phase 2, where we kind of investigate the safety of molecule in human, and also with a relatively larger study, look at both safety and efficacy. But now I'm more moved to this phase 3 to seek definitive proof of this molecule efficacy and safety in a very large number of patients. So yeah, so I want to give you a flavor through this case study of kind of a piece of stat work we do here, basically related to this Bayesian network meta-analysis of rheumatoid arthritis treatments. So for example, you have a phase 2 data available for this rheumatoid arthritis, and you also have the relevant literature data. And then team want to make a decision whether or not we want to move to phase 3, right? And there are actually several questions people may ask. For example, how does the Lilly drug, represented by RY, compare to other drugs? Focus on this binary endpoint, the response rate at a particular time, 24 weeks. And then how should we design the next phase 3 study? And there are many things we can think about. Whether or not we include active comparator, whether or not we look at the non-inferiority versus superiority, and what about the sample size for those different scenarios? So one kind of technique that could really help here is this Bayesian network meta-analysis. So for example, we first collect the data, relevant data, focus on this comparable study design and patient population. In this case study, we came down to these 22 similar studies. And then by using this type of approach, you can kind of focus on the same endpoint. You can actually compute this posterior distribution for each of the treatments. And then you can kind of compare among those treatments, see relatively how Lilly drug compares with other drug. And this will help you design your later phase 3 trials, right? So if you, whether or not you want to include active comparator, if you want to include active comparator, which one you want to include based on this relative comparison. And you can also compute the probability of study success corresponding to different scenarios. For example, here, for the non-inferiority, we may consider a particular margin. You have a probability of success. For superiority, you have another one. And maybe that's too low. You want to increase sample size. And then after increase sample size, you actually increase your probability of success. And then you kind of play with your margin. You have maybe desirable probability of success. So there's so many things that you can play with here, driven by this kind of statistical methods, instead of doing directly head-to-head study with the compound you want to compare with. So I would consider this as a power of a statistical approach. And this is just a very one brief example piece of work of many work we do here at Lilly, kind of supporting this drug development process. So in terms of career opportunities, we offer the summer intern program. I myself was an intern at Lilly, and we actually will have this intern program started in a couple of weeks for this summer. Usually the application process started around October, November timeframe with deadline in January. And we will have multiple master and PhD level position available for internship program. And we also have co-op, either in spring or in fall. We currently have one in the spring coming to an end in the wrap up. But we don't have a fall this year, but previous year we have fall. So we either have it in spring or fall, similar to like intern program in terms of the content. It will be project focused. And we will have this full-time position opening for project statisticians and stat analyst, PhD and master level at GSM. So if you're interested, please submit your resume to GSM career portal. And also please check out our career page at lilly.com for more information and other opportunities. So in the end, I put my contacts here and our HR contacts. If you have any questions, feel free to connect offline. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, for your insightful presentation, laying out your journey at Eli Lilly, highlighting the role of sDNA in drug development. And I really liked how, you brought the case study for RA using Bayesian, just to give us a little flavor of what is done by the sDNA group. And, I've been using Bayesian networks for several projects at P&G, and it's a very versatile method. So I really appreciate giving a highlight on that methodology. And one thing that I have to note is, out of the 36,000 employees at Eli Lilly, my sister Olivia is one of them, and she's in the global neuroscience department. So, but thank you so much, everyone, for your insightful presentations. we'll move to the Q&A. So what I'll do is read the Q&A from the chat, and it's open to our panelists, and you can either answer as a group or individually. So I will start with our first question, and I think this one is specifically addressed to Rebbecca, and the question says, you had said that the future career path doesn't necessarily have to stay in statistics. What are some examples of non-statistics lateral and upward movement within the company?
So yeah, that's a great question. You know, one I never really thought about before joining pharma. I always just think if you have a stats degree, you do stats wherever you go. But, you know, so within Janssen, and it's probably similar at other companies, one of the roles we have, it's like the compound development team leader. And this is the person that is charged with sort of overseeing all of the studies for a particular compound. So, you know, if there are different indications and that sort of thing. So making sure that, you know, we're having our locks on time, that we're, you know, all of our top line results are reported on time. So it's more of a sort of operational strategic role, as opposed to like focusing primarily on like sample size calculation or on study design specifically. And then anyone from sort of any functional role can sort of, you know, be a compound development team leader. So it's not just, you know, for statisticians, it's kind of anyone. And then I think we also have some other positions and roles, such as in risk-based monitoring, project management, and then data science. And then José, I don't know if you want to add any additional sort of thoughts onto like what can people do outside of your traditional statistics functions?
Maybe I can just mention a few. I mean, immunology is another area that some folks sometimes they migrate to. Related to what Rebbecca said on the compound development team lead, maybe project management is an area that I know at least some of the statisticians that became so good at it that they started, well, let me move entirely to that area and pursue a career. There's also management. So people may grow in the management ladder and then take positions that not necessarily, well, they are outside of statistics, but not even stay within the stat department. So they may take a leadership position in another department, for example. But one thing to highlight, though, and I think the presentations perhaps touch on that, is that within the stat world in drug development, you can do very many different things. So you can be working in the development, let's say the design of a clinical trial, but you can also be working on the manufacturing problem of drugs. So how to address that on, Yenny was talking about like the clinical. So there's a lot of, and the techniques that you have to use as a statistician are very different. The type of the scientists that you collaborate with. So there's a whole range of opportunities that even if you stay broadly within stat, you can always have a different career altogether, depending on the area that you specialize.
Yeah, I also want to add on top of that, I mean, at Lilly, I mean, if you look at our statistician, actually there are several other opportunities in other functions they will pursue in the kind of later part of their career. For example, we even have statistician kind of becoming a join medical team. Because I mean, at least at Lilly, you don't have to, if you own an MD degree, of course, you qualify for medical, but there's also another position in the medical team we call the clinical research scientist. You can do without an MD degree. And then we have statisticians who develop a deep knowledge in the therapeutic area, kind of become a medical, and also become a regulatory, right? Regulatory who are very good at kind of communicating, interacting with FDA. I mean, I think one thing or advantage we have as statistician is the quantitative analytical mind we have kind of cultivated through our school training, right? So actually, which I think is useful in those interaction with agency. And we have a statistician kind of in the management position in the regulatory kind of function. So there also, I agree about this project management. And I mean, basically, I think there's no limit whatever interests you, you can go pursue. Thank you.
Just like as an add-on, yes, like within the development program, there's, for example, people that oversee quality, that like this would be like good clinical practices, good pharmacovigilance practices, and then there's quality, there's regulatory facing with health authorities like FDA, EMA, and there's another group at Genentech called regulatory policy, and actually a leader in statistics moved to regulatory policy and developed further her career over there, and there's also data management. I think like one of the many benefits of doing drug development like as a statistician is that, well, at least at Genentech, statisticians have a very nice view of everything that's going on, and that prepares them to move into leadership positions that are like a little outside of well, leaving statistics a little bit on the side and moving to other leadership positions. Yes.
Right. So it sounds that, you know, you're not only limited in your space in statistics, and there are very broad opportunities to branch out of statistics if that is what you desired. So, and I want to encourage our panelists to answer, you know, questions in the chat as well, so we can, you know, keep things flowing. The next question is, you know, coming from a chemistry background as a graduate student, will it be necessary to take statistics or other data science classes?
Maybe I can take a stab at that quickly. So it depends on the job that you'll be applying for. So there are plenty of jobs in the pharmaceutical industry for chemists. So a lot of what we do has to do with chemistry, the manufacturing piece, the development, discovery, the coming up with molecules. So if you want to have a job as a clinical statistician, for example, then yes, I think they can, unless you have already some experience on the stat side, but most likely you would be expected to come with a knowledge to be able to do like some basic statistics, like apply and all that. But so I'm not sure about the question, if the answer is joining a pharmaceutical company in any kind of role, or if it's joining as a statistician with a background in chemistry.
Yeah, I think it's coming from, you know, being having the chemistry degree, and if we are interested in working in, you know, in the pharmaceutical field, we'll, you know, of course, we'll have to have some. We're not asking, you know, anyone to become a statistician, but having those key foundations in statistics definitely helps. So, next question, are outside collaborators such as faculty at other universities on biostatistic topics discouraged in industry? So is the collaboration outside discouraged in industry for a biostatistician role?
I would say not at all. At least at Roche Genentech, there are multiple initiatives where we partner with statisticians, academic statisticians in universities, and there are like especially for method development, methodology, and I have colleagues who are joint. Have a joint a joint appointment at a university. Like they themselves are like adjunct professors at universities, and so it's definitely not the case.
Yeah, just to agree with that. So it's not only not discouraged, it's encouraged for you to have this kind of collaborations. We have, I think all pharmaceutical companies have a number of consultants, a number of people that they keep with having interactions. And I would say that from the academic side, typically an interest that they have in working with us as well is that they get to be exposed to real problems. So opportunities for them to apply methods that they may have developed more in an abstract sense, but then they become very real when I say, look, I have to treat this rare disease, and there are only a few patients in the world that have that. How can I come up with a method that I can get the information that I need to show that my drug works? This is a very real problem that, if addressed, can solve a lot of problems that we see in real life.
Yeah, I also want to add on top of that, I agree. Not only it should not be discouraged, should be encouraged. And at Lilly, we actually have a very strong network of faculty we cover with kind of in the academia institution. We even, for some research, collab with like some government agency, regulatory agency. So for kind of common interest, right? And also like for myself alone, I have ongoing projects or some finished with at least 3 collaborators in the academia institution. So it's highly encouraged.
Yeah, there's, in my opinion, haven't been any situations where statisticians are discouraged to work with people from academia. So the more collaboration to answer a particular question or to advance a particular method or science, that's the route that is highly encouraged. The next question says, is MS in drug development worthy when you have a PhD in statistics? More specifically, if you are interested in developing a career in drug development?
I would say I haven't seen it at play. I wouldn't say it's like whether it's worth it or not, but at least in my experience, the people like people that are hired into the data and statistical sciences group at Genentech, all of them have PhDs in statistics, biostatistics, and almost none have drug development experience, maybe an internship here or there. And so I wouldn't say I cannot say whether it helps, but I can say like many people don't have it and grow into a very successful career. But it may like if it gives you the overview and the language, I think it would be like it would make you more attractable as a potential candidate.
Thank you. We'll jump to the next question. Are there any opportunities for recent undergraduates looking to pivot into this space?
I can probably talk a little bit about that. I think it depends on, just thinking about what do you want to do long term. And I know sometimes that's hard to think about as an undergraduate, especially if you haven't declared a major yet. Or you could even change your mind. I thought I was going to be an MD. And then my senior year of college, I decided that wasn't for me, but I sought out opportunities in the healthcare system. And I was lucky enough to find a research position as a data manager. And so I would recommend, if you're in the space where you're not really sure, looking at summer internships. Probably, I can't think of a lot of them off the top of my head, but those provide a lot of exposure, I think, to just depending on what you want, if you don't know, right? It's just like you don't know what you don't know. So trying things out during your summers, right? Or if you're able to shadow someone, even during the school year, like in your town, near your university, and just trying to get to know kind of, what is this all about? And that's kind of just how I've kind of operated. I've kind of had this sort of non-linear path and with a lot of different experiences, some related to stats, some completely unrelated, but they've all helped form sort of what it is I want to do long-term, and not just professionally, but like, what do you want your life to look like? And again, I know that's a lot to think about sometimes, but I always try to implore people to think sort of, yes, professionally, but also just your life in general and how your career, how the work you do fits into that, or how they work together. But definitely, yeah, internships, shadowing people, reaching out to people on LinkedIn. Sometimes some people like that, some people don't. Asking questions, attending conferences. I can't emphasize enough. Attending conferences, joining professional societies. Typically, there are student rates to join these societies. If your university, check to see if your university might help to pay for memberships. I think those are a great way to network again and just talk to people like yourselves, talk to people who have been in the field for a while. I think those are some of the ways to explore kind of how to get into this space and some of the things you might be interested in. Happy to if other panelists have any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, Rebbecca, I think you brought out a lot of very interesting points. I just want to put a plug in for some of the professional societies because I am involved in some of them. But organizations like ENOR, for example, the East North American region of the IDF, they do organize workshops for undergrads during this annual meeting that is held. So we had a recent one in Nashville back at the end of March. But if you want to go to their website, for example, take a look and say, look for some of the workshops that are offered. Some of them are targeted exactly at undergrads because that's the idea of bringing people, exposing them to what stats is, what biostats is. Sometimes people don't have that exposure during their undergrad. So that take a look, research that, and there are even scholarships for people to attend the meeting and participate in those workshops. And in many cases, that has been a career, a transformational point. You say, look, I didn't know all that. I can work on this, work on so many interesting areas in the medical research and whatever that is that people do make changes, like Rebbecca, perhaps. I don't know if that was the reason why you did it, but that's the intent. So the intention is to reach people exactly like you that may make that change and come to statistics, to this big umbrella that we are.
All right, thank you so much. We're moving on to the next question. How do you ensure that the statistical models and methods you develop are robust, reliable in the context of healthcare research?
Maybe I can get started on that one since I work in a group that calls itself Modeler, right? Now that's a very, very interesting question, a difficult one, of course, because as I mentioned when I was talking before, what makes our industry a little bit unique is how regulated it is, right? And for good reasons. So essentially, when it comes to clinical development, we have a license from society to have experiments in humans. At the end, that's what it is. We give them something, we don't know exactly how it's going to work. We do our best to assume that it's going to have a positive effect, but at the end of the day, it's an experiment that we run. So for that reason, so there's a lot of scrutiny on what we do, how we present results, and how we hope to demonstrate that our drugs work and are safe, right? So regulatory agencies from around the world have a saying over what we do, and they can look over our shoulders at any time. And the issue of validity of models come up all the time because we can say, look, we can have a very efficient way of analyzing data if we make some assumptions about the trajectory of an endpoint over time. Instead of just doing comparisons at each time point, we want to say, well, suppose that it behaves like an exponential curve, and then I can leverage that and then increase the power of my study, do something like this. And the question often comes up, how do you know if that's the trajectory that will be verified? So the answer that I would give to that is that, okay, it takes a lot of data to try to demonstrate a lot of, we have to come up with models that have some ideal justification from some semi-mechanistic or mechanistic point of view that are validated by application to data. So you apply that to data that you saw before, data that you see during your trial. It's harder to do that for something that's totally new, right? And you engage in discussions with regulatory agencies. So that's basically what it is. There are processes by which people actually literally validate models. So EMA and FDA have entertained and have given actually validation to some models. There's one, for example, for Alzheimer's disease. So how does some of the measurements of Alzheimer's cognition decay evolve over time? And they went through a whole process of validating. It's a lot like a submission for a new drug that you have to, so this is my claim, this is what I want to achieve, this is the data that I have, this is why I think it's justified, and blah, blah, blah. And people have gone through that process and actually have had models validated. but it remains an important and difficult, very difficult issue. So we don't have the luxury to just propose a model and say, look, this is it. That's how it behaves, and take my word for it. You have to go. It's a lot harder than that in practice, and it's a case by case as well.
Yeah, I want to add on top of that. I agree with all those points, and in particular, I agree it's basically assumption driven. So because every model is robust under its assumption, right? So maybe first of all, we should think about whether or not those assumptions make sense. For just one simple case, for example, when you estimate the treatment effect, there are like conditional treatment effect or unconditional treatment effect. Like, for example, if you focus on binary endpoint, you use logistic regression. One thing you can do, or is commonly done by industry, is to look at this kind of least square mean type of conditional treatment effect. But the recent draft guidance on covariate adjustment released by FDA kind of give an example about using G computation to provide unconditional treatment effect. So basically that depends on what you are doing, right? So I mean, both of them are correct under their assumption, right? But that depends on what you are doing here. So I think assumption is the key, whether or not you can justify your assumption, and under this assumption, you can kind of whether or not you have this appropriate analysis or so-called robust analysis here.
Thank you so much for, answering the validity and robustness that are needed for, statistical methods. I'd like to add that it's going to be a continuous process to demonstrate that your method is robust and valid. The next question is, are there any opportunities for MPH students with a major in epidemiology and minor in biostatistics? Also, what are the skills required to get into clinical research department with a medical background and public health background?
Maybe I can talk a little bit about this, and of course I'll ask for some help from my fellow panelists too. But when we think about sort of entry into and like what's important for the work that we do, you don't necessarily need to have, and I think a couple of people have kind of asked this question in a couple of different ways. You don't necessarily need to have a pure stats like whole like trajectory, right? From like high school, college, like grads, master's, PhD, it doesn't necessarily need to all be statistics, but we do like to see in our group sort of an understanding of sort of the foundational statistical concepts, right? Because there are things that we're just charged with and expected to know, again, in terms of design of experiments, understanding the methodology, and in terms of like when we write our SAPs and those sorts of things, like that's information and knowledge that is kind of like lives within the stats group. And so not that other groups don't know that, but that's kind of our charge. And so I think thinking about foundational statistical concepts, being able to demonstrate knowledge and applications of those concepts. I think programming experience is also important in our group. You don't have to be like a master programmer, programming, I don't know, like really fancy software. It's great if you can, but we do quite a bit of programming in R and SAS. I'm trying to think what other programs, some people might even use Python. And so you don't need to know all of them, but just having some familiarity with the programming language also helps. Yeah, those are kind of the things I think of off the top of my head. When it comes to just like things that are important to know, and whether you have a stats background or computer science, right, with maybe you got a master's degree in stats or something, right? Like I think all of those kind of help, if that makes sense.
Yeah, just to add a little bit to what Rebbecca said. So in terms of the question about epidemiology, having a master's in epidemiology, there are definitely epidemiology departments in pharma companies, in big pharma companies, including ours. But so plenty of opportunities for epidemiologists. I think oftentimes the ones that I have worked with, at least in the past, they tend to have a PhD, but there are also opportunities for people with a master's degree to come in, to join, add value, and eventually even many people do that while working. There are programs that allow that kind of activity to be done, but lots of activities. I also very much second what Rebbecca said, that the path, the career path into statistics doesn't have to be linear, or doesn't have to go necessarily to math or statistics. And I myself am an example. My undergrad is in engineering, so it's a long way that I started from and ended up going to statistics in bizarre ways through my career. And so many people, at some point I was having lunch with, let's say, 6 or 7, 8 people working in my company. None of us had an undergrad in statistics, which was bizarre at the time. I said, is that almost like an asset? People don't have that, but I wouldn't go that far by any means. But I think we definitely like talented people that are even more over the past like several years now. We even encourage people from outside of staff to bring in refreshing mindset. And I've had people in my group from biomedical engineering, for example. I even have one person in my group. He's more senior now, but he has a PhD in biology. So eventually he went got a master's instead, and highly successful career-wise, been a GNG for over 25 years. So there's no recipe for that. It's passion for statistics probably is what I would say that is a necessary condition. Well, the rest you can adjust and I don't know, just adapt as you go.
All right. The next question is, what new developments in statistical methodology or data science do you think will have the greatest impact on the pharmaceutical industry in the next few years?
Well, let me try to give it a go here. So one area that we're getting increased interest in, and in a way, what you mentioned relates to that, is this whole area of causal inference. So that is an area that's grown a lot from an academic perspective. It's extremely active, extremely successful, making its way into drug development and into what we do. Because of reasons like the regulatory environment that we do, that tends to be a highly conservative industry for the most part. People experiment with new things, but there's always a reluctance but they always ask, well, who has done that before? Is that an example of a trial that was successful using this methodology? But we ourselves are investing quite a bit into finding ways to bring causal inference thinking and methods into initially perhaps exploratory or secondary analysis, but eventually we think that there's a pathway in there that it will become a demand from regulatory agencies. It's not that it's going to be, let's say, we have to make the case to use it, but rather that say, look, you guys have to do it. You mentioned that the unconditional treatment effect. So maybe that's what eventually will be requested from us, not just, well, we look at this subconditional, that subgroup, and it works very well, but how does it work for the entire population and the people that you want to sell your drug to? So what is the expected treatment effect? So I think it's a matter of time. So I think that that's an area that I think it's growing. I see the growth, but I think eventually it's going to be really mainstream in drug development, and rightly so. I think these methods make a lot of sense. We have to learn more about them and get used to employing them in day-to-day activities. But anyway, that's my view. Maybe I would very much like to hear what the others think about that too.
Yeah, the first thing that, oh, sorry, go ahead, you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I want to offer my thoughts here. I think for this question, we can consider from another perspective. So we can think about what is kind of the development of the pharma industry, the specific need. And based on the need, we can then have the appropriate stat methodology or data science. It's kind of a which one comes first, right? And there may be specific need even for the specific molecule, compound you're supporting. For example, I just give a very brief example. Because I'm in this chronic weight management space, one thing I care about is the weight loss, right? So basically, at the very beginning, our molecule, we can administer the molecule at a fixed dose, low dose, medium, or high dose from the very beginning. But later, we found if you start the patients on high dose first, there may be a tolerability issue. So you should start from low, and gradually we use the word titrate, titrate up to the high dose. So in that case, the modeling you used before, without assuming this titration won't apply here, even though you apply, that will be biased because you didn't take into account this titration step. So that's the kind of the motivation for a development of new method, or driving the development of new method, to take that into account. So to me, I think there's more kind of the stat piece from another angle should be driven by the need from this, like the compound development process.
Yes, I think touching on what José and you mentioned, one thing that I have seen that like it's already happening, and it may be a little bit more present in this coming 5 years, is the estimate framework, which when I heard about it, it really reminded me of the causal inference framework. And so the estimate framework is to think about like, what is the actual quantity that you want to estimate? Like what would be clinically relevant? What would be meaningful? And then like set your statistical analysis plan based on that. And so like it goes like as opposed to you define a linear regression and you hand a parameter and like that's going to be my parameter, and like it may be that under the missing like with missing data and with like patients having to use other medication and all those things that are like practical realities of the clinical trial, like the parameter beta ends up being a little bit ethereal and not really like actually going to what you want. And so the estimate framework is like I think I don't know how it started, but definitely the health authorities are embracing it, and it allows you to define a little bit more precisely what you want to estimate. And at least what I saw in Genentech during the COVID pandemic and the Ukraine wars, like it really helped them deal with these like unforeseen events that can happen during a clinical trial. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. And although we have a lot of questions, we are out of time. And I would like to thank the National Institute of Statistical Sciences for hosting this career fair, and specifically give thank yous to Yenny, you, Rebbecca, and José for their time and their contribution, especially our attendees for participating, and hopefully this has been helpful to you. So thank you so much, and have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.